Yeah, thanks everybody. As Justin said, before founding Anaya, I was a longtime occupier and landlord rep broker in two different markets. Actually, I started my career in Florida, then moved up to New York with CBRE, and I probably deal with more brokers now as the founder of Anaya than ever before, and thought it just made sense. We initially built out our application focused on we've got to be the best product for sort of one business line. We really focused with Occupier Rep. We moved into landlord rep as well. And in 2026 is going to be our big year for investment sales as well. And so just thought we would, kind of just share what we see across, now having just a ton of different users across every company you can imagine. And almost every city, certainly every city, big city in America, but also really across the world, even at this point. And so, really just thought we'd kind of give our thoughts, open it up. There's, feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A, and Justin, please stop me as questions come in, and we can sort of dive into anything. But really, what we're going to do is just kind of focus in on sort of best practices that we see. Why is this? This is weird. Let's, There we go. Sort of best practices that we've seen. Some of it's throughout my career, but also just really dealing with brokers. And so I think at this point, especially if you are an Anaya user, there's a lot of people on this call who are not Anaya users. The sort of really first and foremost of what I see across, not just Anaya users, but just throughout my whole career is, just starting with the data. And I'm going to just also give anecdotes of what we see throughout the application, really breaking it down even by title. Um, and I think that this is really kind of the conversation of CRM. What is Anaya? It's basically a CRM and really a workflow platform. But I think the real key is, when I think about myself going back to sort of, almost everybody gets into this business kind of wondering what the heck the business really even is. Really seeing the business as a sales business, but especially with Occupier Rep, there's so much opportunity because, let's say the vast majority of Occupier Rep is leasing with a lot of acquisitions as well and some dispositions, et cetera. But there's so much data out there. And I think building a business, managing your data really starts with what is your data. And one of the things we've seen in our application with just hundreds of users is kind of what are best practices around data management? What are best practices? And one of the things we can sort of say definitively, and I think a lot of people will agree with this, but is just in just regards to starting with your data is, you know, how much data is even appropriate, right? We've seen this happen before where some of our users will say, hey, here's the, if you know this as an Anaya user, we will do your data migration for you from your Excel spreadsheets or your CSVs or whatever it is. And we've seen this sort of direct correlation when people send us 3,000 companies, 4,000 companies, you quickly realize the vast majority of those companies or not, I wouldn't say the vast majority, but a lot of those companies are out of business. The contacts are stale. And so really the kind of key thing is as you think about your own business of like, what am I really tracking? Is we kind of think of it almost as the Goldilocks effect. It can't be too much data that you can't actually build relationships. You can't think through follow-ups. You can't really appropriately target the right amount of companies. And we've sort of seen across all of our users the sweet spot of the number of companies to be targeting is somewhere between 400 and 800, depending on how many companies you're really capable of going after. And we have a lot of data about this. We can really see the active users that are really crushing it, that are managing a lot of information and doing it really well. And so one of the questions to ask yourself is, do I have a data set? How am I managing that? And especially for the young brokers up front, right? When I was getting into the business, we had to go walk a bunch of buildings. We had to go take all the tenant information. And I was, for the most part, putting that into Excel. And one of the challenges with Excel, as you may know, we wrote a blog article on it that's on our website, is Excel is kind of the best product to start on And then over time, the product kind of gets destroyed. And so even when we were thinking through and kind of creating our vision for our technology, one of the things we thought through was like, how do we solve that problem, which is Excel getting destroyed? And one of the things we're going to do in a few minutes is just kind of like run through a workflow just for Occupier Rep in our application where everything is sort of filtered and around just that workflow. But I think this is really important to just always kind of assess on an annual basis, a quarterly basis, whatever is what is my data set? Who am I really going after? And is it too much or is it too little? And typically, from what we see, it's too little. But there are those situations where somebody just has some enormous Excel spreadsheet they've been using for years. And partly why they switch to Anaya is they say, it's just crap. There's just no real value in this anymore. I sort of have it to have it, and I don't really manage it. I don't really keep up with it. And I'll get into sort of how we solve that problem. But doing the hard work up front, if you're brand new to the business, no technology is gonna just have all of the information of who you should be calling, what you should be doing. And so doing the hard work up front, saying, okay, my goal is to have 500 companies that are in my market or that are in sort of the space that I'm going after. Maybe it's multi-market work. We'll talk about that in our product. But really starting with, how do I make sure I'm not just throwing darts at everything and not managing that data? The follow-up is so key in Occupier Rep. I think almost everybody who's successful in this business knows the first time you call somebody, they don't know who you are. They don't know anything about you. Then you send them an email. They might learn a little bit about you, but it's really in that call 7, 8, 9, 10, even more, because it's such a timing business. And so we'll get a little bit more into that too. But the second thing is, and I'm probably saying a lot of things some people are either realizing or, but I'm really trying to speak as well to maybe some of the younger brokers or the more seasoned brokers who aren't, a lot of the social media stuff is really new. And, I've always wrestled a little bit with that. But I think about my time back starting, in 2010 at CB, and nobody was going on LinkedIn and posting lots of stuff. Nobody was, there were a handful of people maybe on Twitter or whatever, but it wasn't effective. And nowadays, there's really been this delineation between sales and marketing, and that is a huge piece of the business. And we have tons of users who have told us success stories. The amount of stuff I post on LinkedIn, if it's done really well, if it's done really right, has led to new business opportunities. And I think that's kind of a reflection of how these applications, whether it's LinkedIn or whatever it is, have become far more social, but your clients are there, right? Like I always say that the best CRM is the one that clients update their own contact information and their own company of where they work and their own titles. And that's LinkedIn. And so, putting together and thinking through a strategy around these things, and not just on social. I don't think marketing is just social. In fact, we have one of our users. I was spending some time with him. He's been in the business a couple of years, and we were thinking through some kind of creative marketing strategies. And he's in a large market, not a New York City size market, but he's in a fairly large market, and he was trying to figure out how to stand out. And I like to tell this story just because thinking through various marketing channels is something to sort of, really think through for your business. I think everybody who's in this business knows that it no longer works to say, I work at this company, therefore that's a reflection on me. And, you really have to stand out as an individual, even if you're on a team. If everybody's making a ton of money and you're not making any money, you're not happy. And so this is definitely a business where you have to think through, what is my sort of identity in the business and what's my market narrative? And so this person that I was sort of just kind of doing some friendly consulting with, one of the things we had talked about was creating a large block summary. And what that meant was sending out a monthly email to all of the largest companies in your market. And what we started doing was we said, go on to CoStar, go onto all the data sets, get all of the blocks of space that are over 75,000 feet. In his market, that's the vast majority of the only options that are really large. Then go through all the tenants who have signed leases who are that size. And so they're going to be moving in 2-3 years, and put those into a new category. And now find all of the large tenants and send those people a monthly email of just the large block availabilities. And I was super pumped when I got an email one day that said, "You wouldn't believe it. Somebody responded to that. I'm now in the market with an 80,000 square foot tenant." And this is a person who's been in the business a handful of years. This is a life-changing transaction. Was that sales or was that marketing? This sort of creative way of standing out, this creative way of sort of developing your expertise, creating content has been proven at this point to be something that if you're not doing it in your business, I think you're missing out on a huge opportunity. How are you really branding yourself? And I think the world is kind of caught up to this. I think there was a day and age where people assumed you work at this huge company, you must be this really great person. When I started in Anaya, we hired this big design company to sort of develop the product. We spent a fortune on it. And one of the things I realized was the people that we hired for this big sort of design spend were like 23, 24 years old. And we're a small company, so this huge design company is probably just seeing us as a small account, throwing these sort of younger, less experienced people. We later shifted to hiring a freelancer, somebody who's been doing it for 30 years and had this huge track record of success. It cost us a fraction of what this sort of large agency wound up costing. And I think at the client level, people now know that it's kind of similar. In this business, you don't really get this huge company. You really get the people, you really get the brokers that are sort of managing every stage of the transaction. And so it's incredibly important to specialize. And one of the data points that we have realized, I think there's kind of this narrative that has taken place in commercial real estate brokerage, which is in large markets, you need to specialize. And then when you move downstream into very small markets, specialization doesn't matter. You kind of need to do a little bit of everything. And we have users in small markets, large markets, sort of all over the place. And unless you're in a tiny market, we have still seen it to be the case where specialization matters maybe even more in sort of small to medium sized markets than it does in large markets. And that was surprising to me, but we've seen a lot of our users who are in secondary cities, smaller markets, even large towns, I would say. They would probably be insulted by me saying that, but who say, all I do is tenant rep. This is what I do. I will refer these things out, but this is what I do. And those companies still say, I want to work with you because of that sort of specialization. And so what is your market narrative? And then how do you develop a marketing strategy as opposed to what is your sales strategy? I am not a marketer. I have come to realize that in building a company, that marketing is not my forte. That's Justin's forte. He's very good at it. He thinks a lot about it. And I've come to realize that it is a skill set to really, really learn. It's wildly important. And I can't stress that enough at the broker level to really think through, okay, what is my sales strategy? What is the number of outbound calls I'm going to make? But what is my marketing strategy too? Do I want to post X, Y, and Z? What do I want to post? Do I want to send out physical mail? Or in just creating a routine out of these things? And, really in a nutshell, what do I want my business to look like and how do I start doing that now? And I think that the young person that I just mentioned, who's now, closed an 80,000 square foot deal, promoted twice as a result of it, of that single deal, um, would tell you that this wasn't a sales activity. This was a marketing practice that I repeat, that I do over and over and over. And I think it's just a kind of fascinating element of this business that makes commercial real estate brokerage different than any other business, that you have to do this at an individual level, at a team level, and obviously leverage the company's capabilities. And it creates some complexity, I think, that is unique to this business. But I do think it's crucial, especially for occupier services, as to what am I good at? And am I the best at that? And how do I get in front of the right people? I think that's more relevant to occupier services than any other industry. And so we'll get into this heavily um, in the sort of demo of the product that we've created just for occupier services. But I think everybody who's been doing occupier services knows it's heavily a timing business. things like tracking all of the lease expiration dates for all of the companies you're going after, understanding the termination dates, which nowadays are basically an expiration date worth tracking as well. And really, being pretty voracious about overly communicating as opposed to not trying to communicate too much, I think has proven to be, really kind of the key. And so timing is so crucial. How do you manage that? How do you, in our product, we'll show you this, but, we obviously remind all of our users of all the expiration dates in advance without having to go create those reminders. It's just something Anaya does because I knew how important that was. There were plenty of times, probably almost every deal in the first kind of 2 years of my career were just spent because I was tracking these expiration dates. And that's one of the nice things about occupier services is it's less volatile to the market than maybe investment sales because it's what I call soft recurring. It's not non-recurring in the sense of maybe investors just don't buy right now or sellers just don't sell. There's just lulls that happen. But leases are always expiring. There's always a transaction to happen. And so trying to get ahead of that, whether it's in renewals or relocations, is so critical. And so how you track that information is maybe the most important piece of it. So, um, and then lastly, we'll get into, well, I guess second to last is how do we build out a repeatable sales system? Um, the vast majority of Anaya users start using the product because they have one problem that they have. How do we get organized around prospecting? And as we've built our product over time, everything we do is focused on how do we let them turn their brain off? How do we help them build a repeatable system so that when they go into the office every day, they just pull up Anaya and they know, okay, here's what I have to do. Here's my notifications for X, Y, and Z. Here's what's at the top of the list today. And, I think a lot about a vice chairman that I worked with when I was at CBRE who, at any given time was doing lots of occupier work, but also leasing tens of millions of square feet of real estate at any given time of, total inventory that he was leasing with a pretty small amount of team members. And I remember asking him, I said, how do you do it? And I'll never forget his response. It's not rocket science, but he said very carefully. And he was very focused, very dialed in. He was sort of a no nonsense kind of person that just was very, very sharp and just had a system that was built out to manage everything that he was doing. And so he was consistency is really the key. This is where great technology can help. And we built Anaya and sort of founded Anaya because I'd never met a commercial real estate broker who didn't say that the number one thing I struggle with is just consistency and building systems. And these are the things where in every industry there's been amazing software advancements to help with that. And yet in this business, it felt like nothing really seemed to work. And so we're really proud of the fact that I think we've solved that problem, especially if you're doing Occupier Rep. How do we build repetition? How do we take and eliminate some of the anxiety of this business? And how do you set goals for the outbound type of work that you need to do so that when your deal flow is at an all-time high, your prospecting doesn't get crushed as a result? And so we'll point out some of those things as well. But really what you measure is what matters. And if you're not measuring it, it probably doesn't matter. And the anxiety comes in where it does matter and you're not measuring it. And so you don't know kind of how to get to the next level. And so, lastly, before we dive into the product and just walk through a specific workflow around how to really just build a routine that leads to success is thinking about this being a relationship driven business. And our product, no great technology is going to all of a sudden make brokers billions of dollars. It's a relationship driven business, and the technology has to enable that. It has to help you forge that. It has to help you be better with follow ups, understand the sort of human dynamic of this business. It's the element of this business that nothing will ever be able to replace. And And so kind of tying everything back together, how do you build a repeatable system around that? How do you build marketing that shows who you are as a person? And I think a lot about what is so interesting about this time period in the business, which where you have so many people going on social and posting, market stats and all this kind of stuff, but there's almost nothing that's proprietary nowadays. There's no market information that's really not known because somebody's out there just posting about it and they want to be the first to display that. And I think a lot about the keys of being generous with your information. If you're going to be on social media and posting market stats and trying to sort of convey your expertise, which I recommend doing, really be generous with that and really try and think through your own data, what you're seeing, the technology you're using to manage that information, to have insights into what you're seeing is really the key. And I think one of the things, and I realize I'm bouncing around quite a bit just to get to the presentation, so we're mindful of everybody's time. But I think a lot about that vice chairman that I worked with, and we were pitching a company one time, and this person, in my mind, was, the most preeminent broker I'd ever worked with. And at the end of a pitch, he stops and he says, and just so you know, this transaction would mean a lot to me. I'm trying to sort of grow my career. I'm trying to break through glass ceilings at CBRE, and so I'm going to be all over this, and it would mean a lot to me. And I think about the humility of just asking for business and not just going in and saying, "Here's how great we are," but actually just being human about it and letting the relationship forge, letting them build a relationship with you, and vice versa. And I think a lot about how relationships are formed. And somebody I really like, sort of a mentor, told me that there's only two ways relationships are built. It's pretty universal, either shared values or shared experiences. It's one of those two things. And the analogy I always give is you could go off to war. You could be in a foxhole with somebody in combat who is completely different, has totally different values, totally different beliefs about everything, but you've been through this crazy experience. And as a result, you walk out of it and say, that's my brother, or that's my, sort of kindred spirit. We've gone through this shared experience together. And that's what the relationship is built on. And it's a lifelong relationship because of that now, right? There's no shortage of that in the world, of just completely different people becoming extremely close. And then on the counter side of that is the values. There's just certain people you meet where right off the bat, you realize we just see the world the same way. We have the same values. We have the same set of ethics. We've had nothing in common in our lives, no shared experiences, but really quickly we click. And so always thinking through, how are we taking notes of that stuff? How are we really tracking that information and managing that? For me, it's a helpful lens of what are the two things I either need to do or learn about this person to really build a relationship. And so, we'll kind of move on from there and just sort of walk into the workflow of Anaya, how our product has been proven to help occupier reps, which is really the vast majority or a significant majority of our users running their occupier rep business in Anaya. But really thinking through the flywheel of that, starting with your data, starting with the companies in your market that you're going to know as much as you can and be reaching out to them. And when you're calling and doing your sales and marketing and speaking with these companies, not thinking about it as just a way to get a meeting, not thinking about it as a way to get a deal, but every cold call is an opportunity to learn something about that company's lease expiration date or their decision makers, or what's going on in their business. And, my biggest career mentor always said, every cold call is just an attempt to learn. It's not an attempt to even get a meeting. It's not an attempt to do anything other than ask questions and learn. And that will lead to meetings. That will grow your market knowledge. And then managing the client relationships, and then thinking through client retention and how to create reminders on a quarterly basis or whatever it is, because the industry is, especially for occupier rep. In fact, I was speaking with a big vice chairman in Toronto a few weeks ago, as one of our users, and he said, I just lost out on a 600,000 square foot deal when I did the 300,000 square foot deal about 5 years ago, and they just did a huge deal way before their lease expired because they were just growing as big companies often do. And he said, the only reason I lost it is because I never followed up. I just assumed that I would probably do that deal in 10, 15 years, whenever that lease was coming up. And the industry is so filled with those stories that how do you prevent that from happening? What are the systems that you build into place to just always be following up with people? Um, so you can see here, this is my demo and I account, and we've got two different workflows built into this application. There's all of your prospecting, everything we're tracking, and then there's all of our deals. And so I've got this filtered down to just occupier rep. That's all I'm focusing on. If I was doing landlord rep, I could pursue these properties, but just for the sake of this conversation, when I log in every day, I'm taken to this. All of my reminders for the day are here. I am being told, hey, Partners Group has a lease expiring in 12 months. I can just click into that. I can go ahead and send an email to do whatever I have to do. I can check that off the list. And here's all of those expiration dates that are also for their other locations that are built into this. I'm tracking all of their locations. And so just not forgetting, I can't stress that enough, just not forgetting, helping to turn your brain off is one of the most important problems. Getting rid of where there's hundreds of opportunities. And so how do I just free up my brain to just focus on the things that matter? And thinking through the workflow of managing this data set. So when I click into all accounts, so I have this filtered here, what most of our occupier reps are choosing to focus in on. And what I mean by that is these are all of the companies that I'm going after. And so this is 1,200 companies. I give a lot of demos. I would not recommend 1,200 companies. But being able to filter and say, who's got a lease coming up in the next 3 years, and quickly see that information. And let's just focus on clients for a second and see that information. And then let's just move into prospects and knowing exactly sort of what you want to go after, really becomes kind of the key of saying, I know where my opportunities lie. I know what's coming up soon. Secondly, all of these sales activities, when is the last time I reached out to these companies? And so let me filter these down so I can see what's stale, what's not. I'm logging those as every time I make a cold call, every time I send an email. We're obviously ambient in your email client if you're an Anaya user. And so you can sync your emails with these. So we're tracking the last time emails were sent, even if you didn't log it, and really being able to sort of store all the critical information that your clients care about. So Experior Logistics has multiple locations. I know more information about that company. And so depending on what you're doing, you can filter these views however you want. So if I wanted to just do a whole lot of BD and call on these companies, I could just click export as CSV. I could actually come in and say, you know what, also show me the email addresses here. Just go ahead and export that as a CSV. And then I can come in and just copy and paste these email addresses to do my marketing work, to go ahead and send out mass emails, whatever I need to do. But just being able to control this data, this goes back to the Excel problem, which is this view here where you can kind of create whatever view you want. You can filter however you want with your core information. Doesn't get destroyed. It kind of keeps you between the navigational beacons in a way where Excel over time, when you have this much information, there's no ability to create reminders. There's no automatic lease expiration date reminders that happen there. And what I mean by that is if I clicked into Convoy Ventures, right, they've got one location at 195 Broadway, but maybe they also have a location at 40 Fulton Street in New York. And, maybe they're in 20,000 feet there and that lease comes up on this date. You can see here, we're automatically just creating lease expiration date reminders for you. And so I'll get notified 12, 18, 24 months. If it's 400,000 feet, we're going to notify you 4 to 5 years in advance. If it's 5,000 feet, we're even going to give you a 6 and a 9 month reminder. And so every time I log these sales activities that I called, or, did whatever, reached out to Josh Chapman, I can just go ahead and click save. Or let's say I left a voicemail, I can just go ahead and save and schedule the next one right then and there. Let's call Josh in a week. Let's get texted that reminder. Let's get emailed that reminder. Go ahead and click save. And there we go. I can just turn my brain off and know that I've got to reach out to Josh when that announcement or when that notification kicks in, which will just be right up here. So today I've got to call Dan. Let me just go ahead and click Ferguson. Let me come in. Let me call, if there was a Dan here, I would go ahead and call Dan and check that off the list and just keep going. And so hopefully that's helpful with regards to just some of the small behaviors of just the business development section. And I want to shift into now what is one of the more challenging elements of running an occupier rep business is what about when I'm on a team? And so a feature just for teams. So Anaya is your product to manage your business, whether you work by yourself, but if you work with those teams that become 3, 4, 5, 10 people, as you may know, we're not all on everything all the time. It's very rare to find teams in this business where every single person is on every single deal, is on every single prospect. Instead, in this business, teams tend to divide and conquer. And so in Anaya, you come in, create the team, invite the key team members into it, and then you can see everybody that the team members are going after. So some of these things I'm not on, but we all collectively know everything we're on. We can see the analytics of who's logging the most sales activities, who's getting the most meetings, and what our meetings look like going up or down over time, and how does that correlate to our deal flow. And then here's just all the leases and contracts we have out across the team just for Occupier Rep. And so every time you create a prospect, every time you create a client, you're going to be prompted with, do you want to share that with the team or not? By default, we include that team. And so if I came in and said, hey, LogRocket's the company we're going after, we'll say they're at a various location. Sometimes you know this information, sometimes you don't. They're in 20,000 feet. That lease comes up on this date. Again, we're creating those reminders for you. And then we're saying, here's who the suggested decision makers are. So let's go ahead and get email addresses and phone numbers. Let's go ahead and enrich all this information. And then we can just go ahead and invite who the key people are. It's very much a part of our application, is letting you partner with others the way you want to. And so maybe these 2 people are on the pursuit with me, but now everybody on the team knows about that. And so we can just drag this information through. If they told us to take a hike, we can just drop it into an active, where again, when we come back to all accounts, all that data still lives here. So if I wanted to see just all inactive, we could pull these things back to life. Let's go ahead and canvas through those. Let's make sure they're on our email distribution lists. And so that's kind of the efficiency of the prospecting. But one element that we built particularly for occupier reps is the ability to create goals around your prospecting. And so any user can click into this right here and say, my goal every week is to send out 200 sales activities. And everybody can edit their goals. Maybe it can be 50, maybe it can be 20, maybe it can be 500 if you want. But and we send you an email every Wednesday saying, here's where you stand. You've done this much this week. And then we send you an email on a Saturday saying you either did or you didn't hit your goal. And so you can share those goals with each other that are on your team, or with a sales manager, or with a coach, or with anybody you might work with. And they'll also get that Saturday email with regards to whether you did or didn't hit your goal. So right now I'm at 9 for 200. I click into Johnson Controls and I log that I made a phone call. I called Matt. I'll click save. Now I'm at 10. As you know, it's a very reactive business. You're constantly responding to client inquiries, or somebody wanted to go on a tour, or there's all of a sudden a proposal you received from a landlord and you got to respond to that. It's very hard to manage what your outbound is. And we wanted to create a repeatable system so that you and your team members could all create your own goals, be very organized, and making sure that we're all doing our job to grow the business. And so hopefully that is useful. And then as we think about the client servicing of the business, how do we enable you to have sort of best in class deliverables for your clients that keep those clients active and engaged throughout the process, so you're out competing your competition. So if we take Johnson Controls, drop it into clients, we could then go to our deal pipeline, which I have filtered here for my occupier rep deal flow and my sub-landlord rep deal flow. So I could say, let's say I represented OpenAI. I could click this and I could see all of the various transactions I'm doing for OpenAI. So this has been very useful for organization around both those one-off deals that we're doing for the majority of maybe our business, but also for that multi-market business where we're dealing with lots of different people. We could click into the Miami deal. We could invite somebody to be only on the deal. And so just organizing everything from one place, logging the tours, and even coming in and seeing the negotiation progress we're making as we trade paper with one another. So you can see here, here's 195 Broadway. Here's our asking terms, our proposals that we're trading. Here's the counters. And we can eventually just create client reports that are sort of living stories throughout the transaction. So this would be your company's logo, but we have this full cash flow analysis built into the transaction where we can actually tell the story of here's the asking terms, here's our proposal, here's the landlord's counter, here's our counter, here's that net effective rent delta. You can start to see if transactions sort of get off the rails, and then sending out what we believe is sort of best in class deliverable for clients to actually understand the financials as the transaction evolves over time. And so these are really easy to model. We're a few weeks away from shipping the AI feature, which I can actually show you really quickly. The first time we really showed it, but you'll be able to just click into a deal for Occupier Rep, click into this, click negotiation analysis, and then just click add LOI. Go ahead and drag and drop any sort of proposal into this. This will take about 10 seconds, but this will then fully run those financial analyses. And the iteration beyond this will even be that because we're ambient in your email client, you'll just log in and we'll send you a notification saying, we saw you sent a proposal, we saw you received a proposal, we ran those numbers for you. And so hopefully this is what enables, there's a small bug here that we're fixing. I know exactly where it's at. There we go. So this now ran these numbers to know exactly what that net effective rent is, what the total TI is, what the term is. You can see here what the square footage is, term, rent schedule. Here's 4 months free. Here's the rent schedule. Here's the TI allowances. Here's the expenses, just all run through AI. So keeping clients happy along the transaction, managing all that information. And then eventually, as we take those clients and we close those deals, just coming in and actually just creating reminders to follow up. So going into all my clients and just saying, you know what, I want to create a reminder here to follow up with Aleo lighting. Let's follow up with them every quarter. So just follow up with Aleo. We'll start this tomorrow. And let's just have a repeating reminder every month, every year, every week, or every 3 months. And we'll just say the first Thursday of the month. And we'll get texted that reminder. We'll get emailed that reminder. We'll click save. And now I know I'm never going to lose that client because I'm always following up, even if it's just checking in to see how are things going? How's everything with the space? Anything we can do for you? Or more importantly, just asking them for introductions. Are you sending out a quarterly reminder to be asking your clients for introductions to other people? CFOs know CFOs, CEOs know CEOs. And going back to the humility piece of this business, which I think is incredibly important, are you asking for help? When I started building Anaya, I was amazed at how people came out of the woodworks to help. And I think when you do hard things and you ask for advice, ask for help. People really want to help. They just assume you don't need any help. And so I can't stress that enough. Are you asking people for referrals? So I'll kind of just end there. If there's any questions, happy to dive into that. Justin, I don't know if anybody's asked any questions thus far, but I would say now would be a good time. Happy to walk you through more product, but also just happy to answer any questions, in particular about your business. Justin, you're muted.
Yeah, there was one question about the AI that's being utilized that you were just showing. So the question is, what type of AI are you using to implement the marketing pieces? Meaning, are the marketing pieces created or available to send to prospects?
So what type of AI? There's a lot of different various LLMs we're using at different stages in the process. And there's a lot more to it than that too. We run these things, there's a whole lot that goes into it that's pretty technical. But and what was the second question?
The second was just, it was a question about what can you export and send to clients?
So yeah, so right now we will eventually hit a stage where what you can do is send a link to your client and give them the technology to manage all of their real estate on your technology. And you'll be able to see things like when they logged in and what they looked at, and they uploaded files and leases. But today we've really focused in on what I would say is the hardest piece of that, which is all the financial analysis. And so you can see here, I think one of the questions was about the marketing piece of it. So I think I showed this, but right now we have 3 locations, and here's, all of the sort of key financial metrics associated with what these occupancy costs are going to be. And there's sort of the history of the negotiation, and then, call it just the financial model itself. When I go back, if I remove one of those options, let's say 315 is no longer in consideration. So I'm just going to remove it there. Everything we had proposals out is here. Everything we toured is going to be here under consideration until we then remove those from consideration. Now that there's 2, if I go to reporting and I click preview report, all of the margins of this document changed. And so now everything in the UI completely changes. So it looks like a marketing asset your marketing team put together when all you did was spend 2 seconds moving some things around. And so your client logo is going to be on it by default. Your company's logo, which would be right here. I actually mention this all the time, but there's no reference to us. I sort of don't like those products. I'm wearing my broker cap of, I don't want it to say powered by an I. I want it to look like technology that I wound up putting together for my clients. And so this is really kind of what the marketing asset is around that. And so I'm happy, if you want to reach out to me personally, I can show you this live.
One more question. So 2-parter. You showed how to export the CSV to send emails through other mediums. So number 1 was, do you have a tool that you suggest for sending those? Probably just kind of whatever client you're using. But second, how do the sent emails get synced back to the contacts we exported? So just talking about how those emails come back into Anaya.
Yeah, so good question. So when you create your account, just go to edit account, click emails, and then you'll see this right here, sync Microsoft Exchange email account. We don't yet support Google, although we will pretty soon. Very few people use Google Workspace, but we will support that soon. So if you're using Microsoft Exchange and I click into any prospect, this is a full integration with your email client. It's not like a lot of those CRMs that are like have some weird BCC feature or some like on behalf of so-and-so. If I send an email to these contacts, so if I click Aaron, get Aaron's email address, click save, and I compose an email, this is actually coming from, david.young@cushwick.com or david.young@jll.com. You'll see it in your sent emails. And when those people respond, as long as their contacts here with their email address, those emails will pop up here. I can probably find one that has some dummy data in it. So if I click Reagan Capital here, I can filter and say emails. And so here's the emails I sent. to various, let's assume these were the people, and then emails I received and sent and received, how that works. As long as those people are contacts in your prospects and clients, it will be in real time captured in the right location within Anaya. So it's a full email integration.
And then it looks like one last question. Any plans to roll out some sort of a home feed dashboard that pulls in all of the news and articles about your clients and prospects? And then they were just commenting, I know you have a news tab that shows up under each client and prospect, and said, love the platform and use most of the tools you demoed today. So thank you, AJ. So the question, a home feed dashboard that aggregates that news in one place.
I think we have a different idea around that, partly because we want to keep the product lightweight, which is, so it's a great question. So you can see here, if I click Unilever, we get this news and information for context from a million different news sources. So as a result, I can filter and say, hey, what about just news articles that they're mentioned in, or what about, press releases or annual reports or anything that might be really interesting, thought leadership, whatever. The downside of getting it from so many locations is that it's a lot of data. And we've talked to a lot of users about that, of like, should we try and like weed this down to like really just business oriented things, or should we just show everything? And almost unanimously, everybody said show everything, because I routinely just find an article and copy and paste it and then send it as a prospecting email just to show that I'm thinking about them, that I read this, whatever. And so we have actually seen a lot of people get meetings based on just that kind of reason to reach out. But what we're going to be doing is sending you a daily email. This is a few months away, but sending you a daily email where we have run all of the news through a really unique sort of AI feature. And especially for occupier reps, the filter will be things like M&A activity. Did they buy a company? Did they get acquired? VC fundraising. Did they raise capital? Are they mentioned in really important business articles? Were there key C-suite decision makers that moved, or heads of real estate that either came to the company or relocated to another company? And then some other things like, obviously, hey, there's going to be an article that they signed a lease in a new location or something like that. So real estate news will probably be the only things for occupier rep that make it through that really tight filter. And the goal is that, let's say you have 500 companies, you might get a handful a day, but every one of them will be something that's actionable that you can actually take action on, send an email about. So you're not just inundated with kind of useless information. I mean, I think it's one of the assets that we can deliver as a very specific application with a very specific data model, is that we can say, hey, we know exactly what occupier reps want to see. Whereas let's say you're using some sort of generic CRM, it's never going to be able to filter that down. And so hopefully that answers your question. We're already working towards it with some of our news providers to already start weeding through and sifting that information. And it'll be something you can sort of select if you want, like, hey, I don't really care to see it for this company, or I do care to see it for that company. But that's a huge feature we're well underway with.
David, last question I see here is it was specific to getting started. So how do you get started? And then also earlier in this webinar, you had talked about when you become a user that we import your data. Could you say more about that? So getting started, and then how we bring data in for new users.
Yeah, it's easy to get started. I mean, anybody can I just click out of here and sign out. Anybody can go to our website, click get started for free. There's no credit card required or anything. There's a 10-day free trial, and it's, a total zero state. And so, create your first prospects, enrich the contact information, get familiar with how we show you who decision makers are, all that kind of stuff. Get email addresses, phone numbers. Once you're ready to subscribe, you can send us, I mean, in 90% of situations, it's just Excel files. 10% is like a CSV from a CRM. You can actually send that to us. And And we will actually, we have people on staff who just, all they do is the data migration. So they're very well trained. We've spent a lot of time with them. They're awesome. And they kind of know exactly what to look for. They're going to update your information with, hey, this company is no longer in business, and or hey, these people are no longer at that company. So it's a very useful step for making sure that when you start using Anaya, you're also starting with a really clean set of data. And so I've never seen a CRM that has a really, really great import feature where you just kind of take existing information. And what we've learned is that the way brokers are mostly structuring their information in Excel files is pretty crummy in general. And so so we just have people that do it, and they're awesome. They're our unsung heroes. And so we've had some users say, hey, here's 1,500 prospects, and that'll take us, call it 2 or 3 days to do. Usually it's somewhere between 200 and 400, but that'll take a day. And so we do require a subscription for that. So after the free trial, once you get up and running with that, that's something we offer.
That's great. David, that's all the questions. So I will leave it to you to close it out. Thanks, y'all, for being on.
Yeah, appreciate it, Justin, and appreciate everybody being here. So I left the brokerage business and I went to the PE business, and I was working at a company called L&L Holding Company in New York. And, I think partly why I left the brokerage business was I wrestled a little bit with, like, does what I do really matter? And, we're just helping companies find real estate. And the funny thing is when you go to the ownership side, you realize everything is about the brokers. Everything is about, are you a landlord that brokers want to bring deals to? If you are, you're going to succeed. We all know those landlords who don't treat brokers very well, and as a result, they leave a lot of money on the table and they struggle. And it became very apparent to me that this whole business is built on the backs of brokers, and as a result, we just decided, you know what? Let's just build for brokers. Let's just replace the Excel spreadsheets, and let's just build the best technology we can where you have total portability of your information, and you can have one product your whole career and partner with people and build teams. And we are still there's a lot of product that we have. There's a lot of users that we support, but we are still in the early innings of building what I think is the industry's sort of only technology that really mirrors the various different workflows, but particularly the Occupier Rep business, which I feel confident we are the best product in the world to support. And I don't say that lightly. I say it because it was kind of my main mission, and we have so many users now. And like anything, it's starting something new. And so, there's always a little bit of sort of upfront effort, but once you get rolling with it, you start to see your business performing in a way that it wasn't before. And we just have so many case studies about that now. So feel free to reach out to me personally if you just want to catch up more about it. I'm just at david@anaya.co, and happy to give you a demo myself or have one of our team members do that. And but yeah, really appreciate everybody joining. Happy to have an offline conversation about any of this, and look forward to catching up soon. Thanks, Justin.